All right, so welcome everyone on behalf of Decoding Dyslexia North Carolina. My name is Emily Mora, and I'm so happy that you're able to join us tonight for Understanding Dyslexia Evaluations, Public Schools versus Private Practice. I'm Emily Mora, a speech pathologist. I work in private practice, as well as being a board member with Decoding Dyslexia. And I am very honored to be joined this evening by Meghan Baulch. She is a speech pathologist with expertise in many areas, including dyslexia evaluation and treatment. And she's also the founder of Therapy and Education Connections in Holly Springs. So right now I have everyone muted, but at the end of the workshop, we will open it up to answer any questions that we can help you all with. So we've got a lot to cover. I will dive right in. Just as a quick intro, a reminder, we are focused on dyslexia this evening, which is a neurobiological disorder, disability that focuses in on difficulties with word recognition, word fluency, reading fluency, and spelling. So it focuses in on what you may consider more the basic reading level, right? Being able to pull the words off the page, read them fluently and accurately, and also being able to spell words. And without that, quality reading comprehension will be extremely difficult. Also, very important for what we're talking about tonight when we're talking about public school evaluations for dyslexia. Federal education, special education law, known as IDEA, impacts all public schools, and it places responsibilities on the states. And I'm just listing out a few of those key responsibilities here. Child find, the responsibility to identify children with disabilities who are in need of special education and related services. It's also the school responsibility to provide a free and appropriate public education for everyone in the least restrictive environment. And it is also the state's responsibility to make sure that procedural safeguards are in place to protect the rights of families and children. Here at Decoding Dyslexia, we are often hit with the question, does North Carolina recognize, identify, and support those with dyslexia? And the answer to that is a resounding yes. It is documented all over. In addition to being documented in IDEA federal law, it is documented all over our state policies as well, one of which is documented right here. One other question we are frequently asked, can schools require a medical diagnosis to be brought in from a family for a school to recognize and support dyslexia? And the answer to that is a resounding no. So as I mentioned, we in North Carolina have a variety of legislative documents that mention and that support and are related to dyslexia and related disorders, one of which is from 2017, House Bill 149. And this was an act that required the State Board of Education and local boards of education to develop tools to ensure the identification of students with dyslexia and dyscalculia, which is a disorder related to math abilities. And I have more information here, linked to that House bill and a link to the North Carolina dyslexia topic brief. In addition to putting out the recording, we'll put out a copy of all of these slides so that you can actually access these links and peruse them for yourself to get more information. So tonight is all about evaluations, but I just wanted to quickly touch on universal screening in public schools. And then Megan's going to dive into individual evaluations for special education. So universal screening is not anything that needs to be requested by a family. Universal screening is mandated across the state in all public schools in North Carolina now, kindergarten through third grade. All students K through 3 have to be screened beginning, middle, and end of year for signs of literacy disabilities, literacy challenges, right? Difficulty developing those basic reading skills and early comprehension skills. Note that charter schools are not required to use the same screening measures, whereas North Carolina for the public schools is requiring DIBELS M-Class. We have an entire workshop that dives all into the purpose of universal screening, why North Carolina has put this policy in place. So I've got a link here to that recorded webinar for you all to look at a later time. But this is just a quick picture of what that DIBELS M-Class screening data looks like, the form that will come home 3 times a year if your child is in K through 3. And it can provide some really helpful data if you are suspecting that something might be going on with your child, and you want the school to look into it further, or you want to look into it further outside of school. North Carolina policy, in addition to requiring screening, they also require some supplemental support or intervention. This is not the same as an IEP. If a child is showing signs of difficulty, possibly in that screener or in beginning of grade or end of grade testing, the school is supposed to respond and put in place an individual reading plan to provide that supplemental support. And you might have heard this referred to as Tier 2 or Tier 3 support, or RTI or MTSS. Again, this is something all public schools are supposed to be doing regardless. You don't have to specially request this. So know, though, if your child is getting extra support in the classroom or in small group, you have a right at any time to ask the teacher exactly what is being done with this supplemental support. What areas are you working on with my child? What progress monitoring data do you have? And you have the right to request those records at any time. And we have a link there to a letter that shows you how you can request that. Also know, regardless of whether your child is getting some supplemental support at school or not, you have the right at any time to request a formal evaluation for possible special education services. So you cannot be denied because that supplemental support is or isn't being provided. You can ask for that at any time. So if you are seeing signs and you're concerned about your child and you're wanting the school to carry out a formal special education evaluation, you want to put that request in writing. And you want to send that request to multiple staff members. Certainly your child's classroom teacher, principal, assistant principal, if there is a special education staff, anyone else that you may know in the building. You just want multiple people included in on that email. In addition, you want to include all areas of concern with any data you can share to support it, right? So in that email, you're saying you're wanting that special education evaluation, and you're listing the reasons why. Possibly that's MTSS, that screening data, that M-Class DIBELS data. You're seeing signs that they're struggling. Maybe that end of grade or beginning of grade assessment, EOG, BOG assessment. You're seeing signs of struggle. Maybe you're seeing struggle in their report card and in notes home from the teacher. Maybe homework is taking an exceptional amount of time. They're becoming anxious and stressed about doing the work, about going to school. Maybe you're having to help them with the work at home. Any of that type of data that you can share about why you're requesting this evaluation. And again, you can request this evaluation at any time, no matter what is going on. One other thing that I want to make very clear, IDEA law specifies that special education services cannot be denied because a child is passing their classes, is advancing from grade to grade. You do not have to be retained or failing to be considered for special education. So at this time, I am so honored to pass it over to Meghan, who is going to talk with us more about school evaluations.
Thanks, Emily. I'm happy to be here to help explain my knowledge as a former speech pathologist in the schools. I served about 10 years in the public schools of North Carolina and Michigan. I've also been a private practitioner for an additional 10 years in the clinic at Therapy and Education Connections, as well as having a child that also had dyslexia and dysgraphia, which was the reason for us coming together and building our practice. So having been on each side of that IEP table, I'm able to see those perspectives of both the educators and parents. And I've had that firsthand experience with the procedures of special education referral, eligibility, evaluation, and the IEP development. So the public school is most certainly responsible for identifying all students with disabilities. These can be students who are homeschooled, privately schooled, or within those K-12 buildings. They also serve the pre-K students, and we also have an early intervention piece for the birth to 3. So these kids are identified across our populations in many settings. It's important to know, though, that there are 13 conditions that we're looking for. So SLD is just one of those that can be found with child find. And when we look at SLD, it also has 8 domains. So when we look at basic reading, that is synonymous with dyslexia. So basic reading or basic decoding. But in the area of reading, we also have reading fluency, reading comprehension. Some of the other domains can include math. So we have math calculations, math facts fluency, or math reasoning. And then we also have oral expression and listening comp. In North Carolina, I found that one is not common, but an underlying language deficit can certainly impact the child across all domains. So when we think of that, when the parent is coming and bringing that evidence, we want to make sure that the parent is focused on specifically which area of concern, as well as what data they have to represent their concerns. A specific learning disability, or SLD, is defined as being just one or more of these basic psychological processes. It's when the child is using language, whether it's spoken or written, and it can manifest its ability, imperfect ability, in that to think, to listen, to speak, to read, to write, to spell, or to do mathematical calculations. So I think it's important that we think about all of these pieces. Each one of these is impacted by our written or spoken language. According to IDEA, it is important to understand that this specific learning disability is not the result of a vision or hearing deficit. It's not a motor disability. It's not an intellectual disability. It's not an emotional disturbance or the result of being poor at learning English as a language. So when we take a look at the criterion, NCDPI has made some significant changes in 2019. We have a few different criterion here. So if we first look at the determinant factors, so this is criterion 1 on the left, the lack of appropriate instruction in reading or math, and that it was delivered by a qualified person. We also want to rule out that limited English proficiency. Unfortunately, that can sometimes stall some of our English language learners. It is known that dyslexia can be difficult to identify in the Spanish populations because we often discriminate and think, oh, they could just be learning English as a second language. And then they rule out the primary factors. So that's that vision and hearing, emotional or intellectual disability, cultural factors, economic impact, and if the child had any loss of instructional time. The third criterion is inadequate achievement. So were they not meeting the age or grade level standards? And when provided with learning experiences and instruction appropriate, did they not make those typical expected growth standards? The fourth criterion there is the insufficient progress. So maybe they demonstrate a lack of response to instruction, intervention, or they're not responding at a rate sufficient to reduce their risk over time. So as you can see now, they have multiple data sources that are coming in. We're not looking just at an EOG. We're not looking just at one criterion measure to rule out or to determine that we should move forward to an evaluation process. These specific changes that are in the law, Emily will show us a SLD fact sheet later. These require every school to show a consistent process of defining, evaluating, and identifying students with SLD. So it does now prohibit the use of discrepancy model alone, which was utilized in the past. For example, this meant that it was required to have an academic achievement score at least 15 points below that of a child's IQ. It also prohibits the use alone of the alternative to discrepancy rule, which is looking at a pattern of strengths and weaknesses, such as on a Woodcock-Johnson achievement test that would have been administered by the school psychologist in their evaluation process. And it now requires data that indicates whether a response to instruction was or wasn't found. So this is after research-based interventions are applied to a regular education learning model or through current goals on the child's IEP in another area. So the goal is early intervention now over the wait to see approach, which had been used in the past. And a shift is supposed to now become focused on providing immediate additional instruction to a student that's slipping behind, rather than just simply determining eligibility in special education. So this way, there is a shift away from that unexpected underachievement model relative to their intellectual ability, and it's moving towards an unexpected underachievement in the context of high quality instruction. So there must be data that the child did receive appropriate instruction, which can be determined even if the child's homeschooled. There must be data based on documentation of repeated assessments of achievement to reflect the student progress. And a full and individual evaluation is conducted with those multiple sources of data. So once we have collected all of this data, whether it is the parent, whether it's an IEP team member, whether it's a teacher, someone begins the process called the referral to special education. So once a member of the child's education team has a concern or suspects a disability, there's a formal meeting called. So this is noted as that referral to special education meeting. And this referral can be initiated by any member of the team, especially the parent. So as Emily has mentioned, if a parent does suspect the disability, they must alert the school team. They put their request in writing and they refer their child. And then this meeting is scheduled. As soon as this written notice of suspected disability is initiated, a 90-day timeline begins. So during this meeting, the team reviews any current school-based test performance and the outside information that's been sent to the team by the parent. That first big decision is, does this referral warrant an evaluation? And is there a suspected disability? So part of the question also asks, do we have those research-based interventions? Are they underway? Do we have data on the child's response to those interventions? And is the child progressing at a sufficient rate in these interventions? Do we need to continue the interventions? Do we need to begin research-based interventions if we haven't yet? And are we still needing to collect the specific amount of data on the response from the child? So the team also is going to decide what disabilities they suspect and what formal evaluations are going to be planned in order to determine if a disability exists. So for here, this is where we would need to meet again and decide on those formal evaluations. Sometimes these two meetings will be combined. So at the end of the referral meeting, we could all come together as a team and decide what evaluations to conduct. So this is interesting though. So NCDPI has put together a specific assessment recommendation for kids with dyslexia. So in this pink box here, you can see that a student who displays those characteristics consistent with dyslexia, we should evaluate phonological awareness, including those advanced phonemic awareness tasks, decoding, word identification, spelling fluency, comprehension, the oral language skills, including listening comprehension and written expression. So in this topic brief, there's also an additional rubric that NCDPI has for SLD. And it's important that all of these areas of assessment are necessary to be given to collect our data. But if we're looking at dyslexia, we do need more than just a Woodcock-Johnson achievement test and those informal assessments that Emily has already pulled out for us. So at times, the school-based IEP team may also assert that the student is high performing or exhibiting those passing grades and making adequate progress. But the parent does have the right to insist that formal evaluation be conducted for SOD when it's suspected. If the team determines that the student is high performing but could benefit from accommodations, the referral meeting may close. The parent or any team member could also request a 504 meeting and a 504 evaluation, but the 504 does not provide those direct goals or modifications, but it could address the classroom accommodations the child would benefit from. So who's on the school-based team? The room can certainly feel crowded. The LEA, this is the legal guiding authority of the meeting. It's often the principal. We have the special education case manager, the regular ed teacher from the building, an intervention teacher or reading specialist that may have been working with your child during the interventions. There could also be a case manager and a special ed teacher, depending on if the case manager or a central office personnel is taking on that role. They will often invite related services such as speech therapy, occupational therapy, or physical therapist. They'll also invite a vision impaired teacher if your child has had any outside vision or functional vision testing, or you suspect that there is something going on there. That vision impaired teacher can eventually evaluate the functional vision or do a learning media assessment, which will assist the team in determining if there's any specific accommodations or changes in print media or computer technology appropriate for your child. And of course, the school psychologist. So each one of these team members has a job on the school-based team to be able to pull that formal assessment data together. The school psychologist at the bare minimum may give the Woodcock-Johnson achievement test or another academic achievement test. Hopefully they'll also look deeper using some of those guided areas that we discussed. They could give like a grade oral reading test or a Pfeiffer assessment of reading. They could give individual standardized tests in spelling or even in written expression. And observations across the school setting are often conducted, and then educational impact forms are distributed to the teachers to determine if they're seeing these same difficulties as an impact in the classroom. The teacher will collect the formative assessments and the benchmark data that Emily reviewed. The speech therapist may give tests of oral expression, articulation. There is a specific test out there for speech called the TILS, the test of integrated language and literacy skills that I have seen given across the state, as well as the CTOP, the comprehensive test of phonological processes. The occupational therapist may look at writing, fine motor skills, core strength, some sensory response to the environment, and visual perception skills. And the vision impaired teacher will conduct a full thorough assessment of the vision acuity, the functional vision, and even the learning media assessment. So that one certainly can be helpful if we're seeing letter reversals, difficulty with small fine print. They may not be related to dyslexia, which is the language learning deficit, but many kids also have a corresponding visual difficulty. So the parents, although they're at the bottom, they also play a vital role in describing the child. It's important to think about their homework response. How long are the kids doing their homework? Are they having an emotional breakdown when they come home from school or while doing their homework? Have there been any emotional or social repercussions, such as with friendships? Is there any background information about previous delays the child has had, such as private or early speech therapy, OT, developmental delays? So it then becomes a team decision. Does the child have a disability when they all come back and reconvene with those test results? So when the team comes back together, the next meeting is called eligibility determination. And you can anticipate nearly an entire 90 days will pass before those testing results are complete. At the end, getting close to the end of that full timeline. So testing is often reviewed by each team member in the eligibility meeting and the testing result meeting. The parent can and should ask for copies of the testing reports 24 to 48 hours ahead of time. There's a lot of information, so it's a good feeling to be familiar with those testing results before they're just explained in the meeting. And although the individual test can have some determinations, it's still a group decision as to what the overall impact of the testing causes in regards to the child's educational or functional impact on the student. So you can have both, or you can have one or the other. You could just have an educational impact, you could have a functional impact, or you could have both. So what is an educational impact? So when we think of this, the educational environment is, we are looking for a measurable difference in achievement. This is measured by their report cards, their classroom test scores, their work product, and the EOGs, comparing the student to a standard, though, not just to other kids in the classroom. And it may be necessary to bring up the standards for the child's expectations and performance to be discussed, especially when you are in a setting where you have a lot of underperforming students, such as a school that has some significant Title I school, that we are looking at a high expectation or the standard. So Emily has a link here to, I'm not sure if we're able to get to it. I think so, right? So we were just going to show an example for what the first grade standards are in ELA, but DPI does have every grade, every month of the grade laid out. I think it's on 12 of this first one we're looking at.
Here we
but
go.
It will show you even the particular subtypes of spelling patterns that are appropriate for that grade. So if we look at grade 1, it's great because then we know in the middle of grade 1, they should have that silent E rule, those 2 vowel rules. We should start learning plurals, changing our verbs. So if that's what the child's doing in 3rd grade, and that's where they're at, we know that they're 2 years behind. And then we also know what skills they have or what we need to advance to from grade to grade.
Yes, very, very thoroughly laid out, including all of the writing, right, Megan? So everything the child should be able to do at the end of grade 1 in terms of writing, right, which is quite a lot, including spelling. That is in the Common Core standards as well.
So then the functional impact. So in the educational environment, this can impact the child's ability to learn, to participate in discussions, their emotional response to the environment, their ability to communicate thoughts and ideas, and how they access the school environment. And it's so important to know that our kids with dyslexia have so much effort that they're putting forth that it could look like a behavior disability. There could certainly be some difficulty. And if they're called out often or behind, then they also end up with a secondary social repercussion. So that functional impact can be huge. So given the data collection and the standardized testing scores, as well as the educational or functional impact, have all pointed to a need for that individualized instruction. In order to close the achievement gap the child has with the standards expected, then the child is found eligible for education or for special education, sorry. So eligibility is another meeting, or if we've gone quick enough, we may have the evaluation results, eligibility, and the IEP all in one day. Oftentimes, again, the school has drafted what they anticipate is going to be discussed. This is not a predetermination, but it is a good way to give the plethora of this paperwork out. It is important, though, that the parent still has that ability to make some changes in the draft because it is what it is. It's a draft. So eligibility determination is conducted after all that testing and data has been collected, and an educational or functional impact was now determined. So if they're determined to be eligible, the specific area of identification is then determined. So that's that SOD versus OHI versus ADHD or autism. We want that specific area of identification first. And then within SOD, if they are found for SOD or with dyslexia, they also will look at which of the 8 facets of SOD is it: reading, basic reading, reading fluency, reading comprehension, and are there secondary or related services that are necessary for the child to be successful. So a child may have both speech impaired and SOD, They might have just SLD, but then receive related services such as speech, occupational therapy, even the vision impaired teacher. But once determined eligible, the team is now responsible for the development of an IEP, or an individualized education plan for the child. The IEP has 4 main components, so you can expect that they will develop present levels of performance, which narrate and summarize where your child is right now. They will develop IEP goals. These are the specific goals with benchmarks, and each person that's responsible for delivering that specialized instruction. They will also discuss accommodations. So these are classroom and testing accommodations, assistive technology the child might need, extended time. You can imagine there's quite a list. There is a set of standard accommodations that are typically chosen for kids with SLD. So coming into that meeting with some ideas of what you do naturally in their homework environment, or what the teacher is already doing for the child that you know she's not applying to the whole class. And then they'll also go over the time dedicated on a daily basis for the special education instruction, such as the child will be pulled out for reading 5 times a week for 30 minutes. They will either go to a separate special education classroom, or they may get that as a push-in, but they will specify all of these things. Or if they're getting speech therapy 1 time a week for 20 minutes, they will lay it out in the IEP. So it is possible, though, once you get to this step that has become so lengthy that they've split these meetings into another day or another session. And it is often helpful to have someone on your side of the table as a parent, because the school team is so large. This person will also help you be less emotional and more objective. So if you do have an advocate, an outside specialist, a neighbor, a mother-in-law, whoever you want to bring with you, it is certainly helpful for the parents to have one more person on their team. And finally, at that time, the IEP will become implemented and serve that child on a daily basis for a year. So this IEP is developed initially, and it can run for a year, but you certainly can meet throughout that year to update it, to add additional accommodations that are necessary, to change the frequency of the services or where they're being delivered. So the Decoding Dyslexia IEP roadmap there on the bottom, that one is great. It's going to just show you the plan for those meetings, and it reviews the timeline of the steps from the initial referral to the evaluation plan to the eligibility, and then the development of the IEP. So it doesn't matter which one of the identifying conditions that you are asking them to look at for this. This is the same for all of our identification, but we want to make sure that you have a visual image of how many meetings this is, and that data collection piece, the formal evaluation process, everything that can happen where it moves forward, or maybe we stop, and what we need to do with those steps.
Thank you so much, Megan. So that was a deep dive into the special education evaluation process in the public schools. And I now will be touching on dyslexia evaluations in the private practice setting. So, a variety of professionals can perform a dyslexia evaluation in a private practice setting. I am a speech pathologist, and that is my area of specialty. You'll also see other professionals, such as psychologists and neurologists, who also specialize in reading and writing disorders, such as dyslexia. As Megan was mentioning, she was referring to SLD, right? Specific learning disability. Well, in the private sector, in the clinical sector outside of schools, we use almost the same term. We tend to say specific learning disorder. Since in the private sector, we are more focused on that diagnostic piece. But whether you hear SLD, specific learning disorder, specific learning disability, dyslexia, it's all part of the same family. Think of the specific learning disorder or specific learning disability as the umbrella, and disorder in reading falls under that, as well as disorders in math, written expression, comprehension, etc. As a private practitioner, I am bound by the American Psychiatric Association's definition and guidelines. The American Psychiatric Association periodically puts out an updated manual called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM for short. The most recent updated version of the DSM is the DSM 5 from 2013. And the criteria for a diagnosis of dyslexia or specific learning disorder, there are now four criteria as of 2013. And they are as follows. So, a student or an adult, right? It could be someone of any age, must have a persistent difficulty for 6 or more months with reading, comprehension, spelling, and or writing despite having received direct instruction. The person also must have struggles that are impacting their school, their work, and or their daily living. These difficulties with reading and writing originated during the school years, but I put that little note in there is mine. It's not from the APA website. So even though the actual struggle to read and write, of course, doesn't happen until you've started reading and writing instruction in school, signs of risk for dyslexia are very often evident in the preschool years. And we have a link to early warning signs there for you. And the fourth criteria that must be met is that these difficulties cannot be attributed to a neurological condition, such as a stroke or a traumatic brain injury. It cannot be attributed to vision or hearing deficits, intellectual disability, environmental factors, lack of instruction, or English proficiency. So, those, as a private clinician, those are the four criteria that I am focused in on. And one thing I just wanted to point out, depending on how long you have been in the dyslexia field, dyslexia world, prior to 2013, the previous version of the DSM, and Megan touched on this as well in in the previous versions of IDEA. The excuse me, sorry about that. The discrepancy criteria used to be highly used. So looking at, do we have someone with an IQ ability here? And then do we have a significant discrepancy between their IQ, which was looked at as their potential, and how they perform on a reading or writing or spelling assessment, for example. But that has been, there have been a lot of issues, a lot of flaws with that technique, that criterion. And that's why it has been removed in the most updated version of the DSM, and why it also has been removed from IDEA. Okay, so as a private practitioner, I am doing a variety of things. First thing I do is an intake. So I'm trying to get as much information as I can from the family before I ever meet the child. I want to hear about their birth, their developmental history, other illnesses, deficits they may have, their preschool years, their early elementary years. I want to hear about any other private evaluations or school evaluations they've had in the past. I'd like to see work samples from school or home. So I do a deep dive into that background as much as I can before I meet the child. And then the clinical evaluation typically spans over a couple of sessions. And in a moment, we'll look at all of the areas we're looking at within that clinical evaluation. And then it's my job to bring all of that data together, what I saw in the clinic, what the families told me, outside reports and samples, and putting all that together to create a final report and making any diagnostic recommendations, interpreting the data, and making recommendations for follow up and support. So there are a lot of areas to assess. And depending on what professional you may go to, a psychologist, a speech pathologist, a neurologist, and even two of the same profession may not do all of the same assessments. But I've highlighted in red the things that I believe are, if we're looking specifically at dyslexia, areas that are crucial to assess. Definitely that family and developmental history, definitely that phonological awareness piece, which is looking at the child's ability to identify, pull apart, manipulate sounds. Because if they're struggling to do that at the auditory level, hearing it, it's really going to impact them at the reading and writing level. Also, looking at rapid naming ability, which is linked to processing speed, that has a strong correlation to reading deficits as well. Looking at short term and working memory, also a strong overlap there. Deficits in those areas are highly linked with difficulties learning to read and write. Of course, looking at phonics skills. So, how is the student doing learning their letters, letter sounds, pairing up and committing to memory those unique English letter patterns, right? So, I've got here the word ledge. Have they become familiar with that DGE pattern representing j at the end of one syllable words and match that TCH pattern? Um, or have they seen these patterns over and over and not been able to commit them to memory for either reading or writing? Looking at their morphology, so their morphological knowledge, so their ability to see parts within words, identify prefixes and suffixes, and know how to use them for both reading and writing. Looking at their word reading ability, both real words and nonsense words, we get different information from each. Not only are they accurate, but how fluent are they? How automatic are they reading words? Definitely looking at spelling and writing skills, so crucial, especially for students and what's required of them in the classroom, and their ability to work with connected text, accuracy, fluency, and comprehension. So there's a lot to look at in a private evaluation. I even have a page 2. And again, not all clinicians will look as deeply at the same things, but the items on page 1, I would say, are absolutely crucial if dyslexia is suspected. These other areas are all very valuable and very important, and certainly need to be assessed if there's any suspected difficulty with any of these areas. I, as a speech pathologist, look deeply at oral language in my evaluations. I'll also look at speech and articulation if there are signs of difficulties there. I'll also look at executive functioning skills. And if I, as a speech pathologist, am feeling that there may be some intellectual cognitive deficits, attention deficits, visual motor deficits, as a speech pathologist, I will generally refer on to a psychologist to administer additional testing. So, we've talked about private evaluations. We've talked about public school evaluations of dyslexia. Is there a place where the two meet? And actually, there is. It is the IEE, the Independent Educational Evaluation. And in essence, it is a private evaluation done as part of the public school special education process. And this is all part of IDEA law. And at this point, I'm going to pass it back to Meghan.
All right, so that IEE just means that it is an evaluation. It's conducted by a qualified examiner who's not employed by the school district in any capacity, that's responsible for the education of your child. At a public expense, it means that the school district will either pay for the full cost of the evaluation or ensures that the evaluation is otherwise provided at no cost to you. So this is a provision of the IDEA, and the parent has the right to request an IEE of the child at public expense if they disagree with any evaluation the child has had with the public school district. So it's subject to these following conditions. So if you request an independent educational evaluation, your school district must, without any unnecessary delay, they can either file due process and request a hearing to show that the evaluation they gave initially was appropriate, or they provide you with the IEE. So the IEE is often much less expensive than the due process, and it also gives that opportunity for a new, thorough second look of eyes on your child's abilities. And unless the school district demonstrates in a hearing that the evaluation that your child obtained did not meet the school district's criteria, then they would have to provide that public expense IEE anyway. So if you request it, The school district may ask you why you objected to the evaluation of your child by the district. And however, your school district may not require an explanation and may not unreasonably delay either providing the IEE of your child a public expense or filing the due process complaint timely. So you're only entitled though to one IEE for each time your school district has conducted an evaluation of your child for which you disagree. So many times this is once every 3 years if they're evaluating approximately every 3 years. So all children are entitled to that IEE. The independent evaluator must have at minimum the same qualifications of the professional requirements of the school-based evaluator. So oftentimes they have to be licensed in your state. Many times there is a requirement that they also have to carry their own liability. They have to complete background checks. They have to show that they're not on a sex offender registry. They have to be able to prove that they are a legitimate business. So they have to send in things like I-9s for the contract. But the parent can choose to have a private evaluation done at any time. However, if you want the district to pay for the cost of the IEE, the parents must have received written permission from the school district before the evaluation occurs. And the independent evaluator then has to contract with the special education department. So anyone can be chosen, but if they are not already contracted with the district, it can take anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 months to get that contract established. So the LEA and the IEE evaluator will negotiate that contract, but there is no limit to the cost that your IE provider tells you that it's going to cost, as long as it's reasonable and custom rates. So oftentimes an independent evaluator, if we bill medical insurance, then we are what's called a fee for service model. That means we can't change our rate for anyone that just walks in the door. So we can't give it to the school-based team at a contract that's lower, and we can't also raise the price. So when you're doing that contract negotiation, it is often just a time period. You have to go through the board for approval. You have to go through the finance department, but it does take time. So if they give you a list and they say this is who you can choose from, just know that you can choose anyone, but if they are not contracted, it is a process. So you have to wait to get the written permission, and the district will tell you what areas you're allowed to get an IE in, and then you have to wait for the contract to be established. Often you'll also have to send a confidentiality waiver that the school can share all of your documents with the IEE professional because they want to know what's already been tested. They don't want to duplicate standardized testing. There's often limits to how often you can give those tests to make them valid. And it's important for us to know the history of the child. It really does kind of bring the pieces together. So that IEE has to provide enough evidence so the IEP team can then determine eligibility for the suspected disability. In regards to that rubric that DPI often uses for each suspected disability. So the IEE must also have enough evidence to develop goals in the areas of need identified. This could be the specific spelling patterns that you want to target, reading comprehension deficits, could be phonological awareness skills, auditory discrimination, but we can't just get standard scores and leave it at that. We really have to narrow down the specific deficits and benchmark goals. The IEE must also identify any suggested accommodations or modifications. So often during the eval, the evaluator will kind of apply accommodations and see what happens, or maybe the child took 3 times as long as the anticipated written expression administration time, so we could definitely justify they need extended time on written expression. It's often the child's response to an evaluation as well. So we want to make sure if they feel that stress in an evaluation environment that we split it into smaller chunks. The IEE must also be non-partial. It has to be objective. It's thorough, and it's often that second opinion of the child's suspected disability. So it is important, that if a parent comes to a private evaluator, that you don't just assume that they're going to give the parent that diagnosis because the parent is requesting. We are thorough, we are very valid, and we are objective when it comes to that. But oftentimes when a parent suspects a disability and they've seen their child, they often have a good assumption of what's happening. So the considerations of IEE. So you certainly can choose an IEE in any area of suspected disability. So if you have brought a concern to the team, you have to be specific when you ask for the IEE. You have to say, I would like one in psychology at the area of, and then let them know. Or I would like a speech language evaluation in auditory processing and speech articulation and receptive expressive language. You may want an audiology evaluation for auditory discrimination disorder or auditory processing deficits, occupational therapy for those handwriting delays or sensory. But oftentimes the district will be very specific. They won't even let you just say just OT. They will want you to label the areas that were tested previously. The same with physical therapy, assistive technology, vision. It's a little bit different there because often in vision, you're going to get a developmental pediatric ophthalmologist, and that's not readily available in the schools. For the assistive technology, there should be an AT team in your school district, but the North Carolina Assistive Technology Project has a great setup. They often do them as well. They have every possible assistive technology there is. For ADHD and autism, the school doesn't often diagnose those in the state of North Carolina, so these could be a medical professional or a psychologist. And physical therapy is often limited to the school-based model within the walls of the school. It can be a little bit more thorough if you are specific about maybe ADLs or other things that were not assessed. So there is no limit to that cost of the IEE, but that is a privately negotiated item between the professional agency and the school. Again, it is fee for service, so the parent does not ever pay up front. The school district is invoiced directly. And then if they give you that list, just know that you can request anyone. And as long as the professional is willing to contact the school district with the minimum qualifications, they should be able to. So the benefits of the IEE. So we really find that private practitioners don't have any other distractions going on. They don't have a big lineup that day of all the kids that they could test. They are devoting their time for the evaluation of your specific child, and they also have this neutral lens. Private practitioners may also have that larger battery of testing materials than the school district, particularly in these dyslexia assessments. They may often be experts in their field and have a plethora of experience, but it is important to interview those skills, to choose an IEE evaluator that does have familiarity even with the IEP process, that they understand age and grade level standards and special education in the public schools. So they should be able to provide you then appropriate accommodations, modification suggestions, and goals that are individual to your child, not just very broad goals as suggestions for the team. And having more information about your child can certainly increase the likelihood of a good quality IEP, can help them become eligible if they had not been previously, but it doesn't guarantee the child will be determined eligible for special education. So the team only has to consider this IEE just like they would have considered their own evaluation results in that eligibility meeting. And they do not have to adopt all the recommendations and the conclusions of the IEE evaluator. Again, that is all a team decision when you sit down and decide what the IEP would look like. So what happens after the IEP? So if you spent that time and you've gone to the evaluator for a few sessions, they write up a report and then they have to share it simultaneously with both the parent and the school system. So the IEE evaluation is then formally reviewed by that whole IEP team in a new eligibility meeting or a reevaluation meeting if the child was already in special ed but not getting possibly those SOD or dyslexia services. The team should meet within 30 days of the conclusion of the IEE, and that is best practice. That is not a timeline. An IEE or private evaluation should be considered as a new suspicion of a disability if the child did not previously qualify for an IEP, or if they didn't previously have this designation as their eligibility area. So oftentimes we'll have a kid that qualifies under ADHD, and the dyslexia evaluation shows that they definitely could be primary SLD or have a secondary identification. So the IE evaluator may or may not be invited to the meeting. It is important that the parent know that if they're not invited, they certainly can invite them. All that means if the district didn't invite them, is that the district won't pay for their attendance. So certainly let your evaluator know so that they can communicate the results themselves and can answer any questions to the team. So the language in the IEEs versus the school evaluation. Emily, I'll pass that back to you. I think that was you, right?
Yes, let me,
Yeah.
oops, sorry, let me open up that document. So this is just opening up the policies governing services for children with disabilities. And again, you all will have direct links to all of these documents we're showing you tonight in the slides. Listed right here in the policy under specific learning disability, you see that they use the term dyslexia. So right there in writing.
So we can see, I'll go ahead. Do you want to run through this one and the next one?
Yeah, go right. Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay. So the language that we may use in those IEE reports is synonymous for some of the school language. So specific learning disability and reading is the educational equivalent of what we would term R48 or dyslexia and alexia in the private setting. Specific learning disability and written expression is synonymous with the F81.81, which is disorder of written expression or dysgraphia. And that medical diagnosis just requires a medical code. Outside professionals like us who bill insurance have to utilize the medical terminology. And the 2020 revision of the North Carolina policies governing children with disabilities has emphasized that that term dyslexia can be used and can be included in IEPs when the outside diagnosis is given. So you certainly do not have to go back and test psychology and try to come up with an SOD in reading. You can use it synonymously. So this dyslexia definition was adopted in that revision, and that's what Emily showed us.
So that was, I know that was a lot of information in a short amount of time. So we wanted to wrap it up with 2 slides just with key takeaways. Because really tonight we were attempting to compare, looking at similarities and differences between public school and private evaluations. So in summary, public school evaluations are focused on determining the need for specialized instruction outside of the regular education classroom, relying more heavily on classroom data, formative assessments, and response to intervention with generally light standardized assessment. And I pulled a quote that really reiterates that from a research study by Adloff and Hogan that talks about with the reauthorization of IDEA in 2004. It allowed for identification of learning disabilities based on a student's failure to respond to scientifically based instruction. The diagnosis of dyslexia then became less important for public schools using this approach because it was a failure to respond to intervention rather than a specific diagnostic label that led to special education services. And certainly if someone does have that dyslexia diagnostic label, they need to be considered. But it really is also looking at their response to evidence-based instruction as to whether or not they will qualify for an IEP. In private practice, right? We've got a slightly different focus, a different lens. We are focused on assessing all areas of suspected difficulty formally, including key factors that might contribute to reading and writing disorders. So that was factors like when I was talking about short-term and working memory, rapid naming abilities, phonological processing abilities, some of those underlying skills. So diving deep into those skills, making diagnostic conclusions and recommendations for services, other clinical follow up, goals, and accommodations and modifications as is appropriate. So, certainly, there are similarities, there are overlap, but there are also differences between the special education evaluation process and private dyslexia evaluations. So that was a lot. We have I'm sure hopefully not overwhelmed you with all this information, but again, know you'll have a copy to the slides and to this recording. And at this time, we want to open it up. If anyone has any thoughts or questions, feel free